who are not familiar with SVC, and I think most of you are, but there are a few that aren't. So I wanted to give you a little background here. So we're down here. We're that gold star in Seattle's Lower Queen Anne neighborhood. And the significance of this will become apparent in just a second. But just if you've never heard of SVC, then you probably are also unaware that these two people, Dick Brown and Cherry Brown, founded this school in 1971. And yep, that would be 52 years ago, which kind of amazing considering how much our industry has changed over this period of time. But Dick and Cherry were teaching illustration. That was their field. And Cherry was this incredible fashion illustrator who was the kind of go-to person for Nordstrom women's apparel. And Dick, her husband, was more of a painter style of fine artist style of illustrator. And the two of them were teaching here in Seattle at Cornish College of the Arts. But they were the only working professionals on the faculty. And at the time, this was like late 1960s, they heard about School of Visual Arts in New York. And they had just adopted this method for their continuing education classes of only having working professionals teach the classes. There was no full-time faculty. Well, Dick and Cherry thought that was a pretty interesting idea, since that was essentially what they were doing up there at Cornish. And so they left to found School of Visual Concepts. Oh, the names are similar, so you can kind of see what was going on there. Well, a lot has changed. We don't teach commercial illustration anymore. We don't teach advertising classes, which is what brought me here. But what we do is that original idea that Dick and Cherry first borrowed from School of Visual Arts, and that was this notion of have working professionals teach the classes. And so these are some of the people who to this day are still teaching here, and they're all fairly senior in their careers, and that's intentional. And you'll notice that many of them have worked at firms that you've heard of, and that's intentional too. So what is SVC? It is a place that teaches people about all things related to design, both content design, UX design, and visual design, as well as writing, taught by working professionals and also taught live. So our classes are not so different from a class you might have in a classroom space, in that they meet at a certain time, we do homework, we have class discussion, but we're from all over the place. So if you're curious about what's coming up, you can go onto our website, svcseattle.com, and you can read about a little more detail on this list of upcoming classes here. You'll find this under the menu, individual classes. Pretty crafty. Okay, so I want to get on with the show, and I bet you do too. So I would like to introduce you to Devon. She got a start, and I hope I'm not stealing your thunder here, but she got a start in kind of the digital realm kind of way back in 2006 at the University of Michigan Life Sciences, where she was a content manager. Who knew that word existed? And instructor, and then started to do front-end development, moved to Seattle, and that's when we met. So she first taught an HTML class here at SVC a decade ago, 2013. And then 2 years after that, by this time, she had become an accessibility specialist and started teaching accessibility classes and workshops here at SVC. So she's known this field for actually about as long as it's been a field, which is pretty wonderful to have that depth of knowledge. And she also has worked at for some top clients, but also for some top companies, and most notably Shopify, where she was an accessibility specialist for, I think, about 3 or 4 years. So we're really lucky to have her sharing her wisdom with us tonight, because she really knows this field very well and is writing a book about it, which you'll hear a little bit more about. But Devon really personifies the kind of people we love to have standing up in front of y'all and teaching our classes, and that is a true expert. So Devon, we are super grateful to have you here, and really appreciate your spending your evening with us. So I'm going to stop sharing, let you start sharing, and the rest of the time is yours. And thanks to
Okay.
everyone for coming.
Oh, I've got a beach ball. That's fun. Let's see.
This is when we revert to pantomime.
Yeah. Uh, sorry. So I can only still see your slide, actually your first slide, Larry, and now I'm beach balling as I try to screen share. So maybe I will pop out and come back in.
Okay.
That might
Right.
be a fix.
Okay.
Sorry, I'll be right back.
Well, wouldn't be technology without a glitch, right?
And if anybody else runs into any glitches this evening, feel free to send me a message, or you can also email tech@sbcseattle.com. I'll put that in the chat. Just, we don't want you to miss anything, but we'll send you the recording if you do.
Hey, I'd love a little show of hands while we're waiting for Devon to reappear. So how many people have taken a class or workshop here at SVC? And you can use the little reaction thingy. Yeah. So most of you have. Okay. Well, then I hope my introductory speech wasn't too laborious.
All right.
How's it going?
I think it's going okay. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Excellent. I'm seeing thumbs up. Okay,
All
great.
right. Away you
Thank
go.
you for your patience. So yes, thank you for joining us. As stated, this is going to be kind of an overview of some must-haves for accessible design. Um, we're going to do a little quick intro. I'll tell you a tiny bit more about myself, and then we'll talk about why accessibility is a UX problem in the first place. Why are we even talking about this, basically? And then we'll talk about some of those must-haves. And then I want to give you some resources and next steps, things you can explore to learn more. And timing being correct, providing we'll do Q&A at the end, sort of depending on what folks have. So I think if folks want to put questions um, in the chat, or there might be a Q&A tab, you were probably explaining that while I was out and resetting myself. But yes, I'll be happy to answer as many questions as we can fit in the time remaining. So like Larry said, I'm a digital accessibility specialist. I actually started doing digital work back in 2001 when I was in college. That was actually my introduction to the web content accessibility guidelines too, which is a long story, which I can tell another time. But yes, I've been doing digital accessibility consulting for math about 11 years. And I'm currently an independent consultant. I do mentoring for people in the field. I do education and I do research. Um, as Larry mentioned, I worked at and attended the University of Michigan for a while, got an MS in information. So I kind of had a previous brief career in library science. And I also identify as neurodivergent, disabled, and chronically ill, which I'll talk a little bit more about as we go. So why are we talking about this? Why is accessibility a UX problem in the first place? So usually what happens at this point in a talk is people want numbers and statistics that they can take back to their organization to be like, this is why we care about this. So there's numbers like 27% of adults in the United States have at least one disability. Nearly 80%, and this number might be higher now because there was just an update, but about 80% of web content accessibility guidelines relate to design. And there's also lots of estimates out there about how much time can be saved by a team by doing design accessibility work instead of just cleaning up bugs at the other end of the process. So I do include these because you might need them, or at least think you might need them. But really, I'm talking about this because accessibility and equal access for disabled people is a human right. This is kind of the framework that I come from these days, and I don't think there's a lot you can argue about it. And when we talk about kind of getting buy-in from people, really it keeps coming back to this. If people care about other people, then they will be supportive of the work. And if they don't, they probably won't be. And maybe don't work with those people, which is really is easier said than done. But so just for context, this is the kind of way I'm thinking about this, the way that I'm coming at it. And so from a UX perspective, UX designers, writers, researchers, people who do UX work have the obligation to advocate for disabled people and the opportunity to do so from the beginning of a project onward. And I realize that designers aren't necessarily making business decisions, but there's a lot of potential and a lot of power that designers have to make products more accessible from the beginning of a project instead of doing it at the end of a project, like a lot of organizations do. And one of the reasons why it's a UX problem is most accessibility issues are related to either how people take in information and process it, either their inputs and outputs, or how their brains actually work. So these are a few different accessibility kind of needs that I'm going to bring up throughout the rest of the talk with different examples. So things like memory, attention, learning, information processing, language and speech, sensory inputs, so vision, hearing, touch, and vestibular and neurological systems, which is very long words to say things like motion sickness and seizures, things like that. And then the fine motor skills. So basically, how do you touch devices? If you touch them, how do you interact with them? How do you take in information? And then how does your brain actually handle it once it's in there? And to make an example of myself, so I have ADHD. Shout out to all of my peeps out there who got diagnosed as adults, like I did earlier this year. I also have fibromyalgia, which is a chronic pain disorder, really a central nervous system disorder, and I also get migraines. All of these things are very common together. So often people that have one or the other of these different disorders. And so for me, that affects my memory, my attention, my information processing, my sensory inputs, because sometimes my vision is not so good. Sometimes if I have a migraine, I don't want to be looking at something, for example. I also get motion sickness, and I actually get migraines triggered often by like a lot of movement. So vestibular and neurological systems is actually absolutely checked for me. And then the fine motor skills. I sometimes have difficulty using my hands. So I might use different tools or different techniques to go about my day using devices, depending on how I'm feeling on a given day. But just to give you an example of how these different needs don't kind of live in a silo, they are, I need all of these things all the time in some capacity. So designing for one or the other isn't going to cut it. People need to be thinking about holistic design. Sorry, I just smacked my microphone. Sorry if they make terrible noise. Okay, so let's talk about those must-haves. I've made sort of 5 big buckets. And sorry, I tweaked them again a little bit since the description. But the first one is convey with text, enhance with color. The second one is create an inclusive content strategy. Third is define interactions and interaction order. 4 is provide media alternatives. And 5 is give users control. So some of these you might already be familiar with. Some of them might be new to you. So let's go through them. We'll start with the first one, convey with text, enhance with color. So the main reasons for this are, there's lots of reasons why people might not perceive color. They might not use their vision. They might not, they might have color blindness. They might have, different types of vision issues that make different types of color difficult to process. So you don't want to assume that people can see what you're designing. You also don't want to assume that they can see the specific colors that you've designed for. This also includes things like color contrast. So you want to make sure that text and informative graphics and icons have enough contrast based on their size and weight. There's a bunch of WCAG criteria about that specifically. Also, I'm not going to talk about WCAG a lot in this because I want to come from that kind of more holistic angle. But the underpinnings of a lot of this is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And other things like underlining or differentiating links in some way. Don't just use color to differentiate different things. And this is going to impact, different people that have different sensory inputs, as well as people that have different types of vestibular or neurological issues. So to give you some examples, one thing that is pretty common is a color filter. So this is a screenshot of Duolingo on my iPhone. And if I am having a migraine or getting a migraine, I will put on a red color filter because it is easier on my eyes. And this is a setting at the operation system level. So you can go into the accessibility settings and change it. And what it does, for the way I have it set up, is that it makes some colors more saturated and kind of dulls out other colors. So the upside for this is that, yes, I can see the screen more easily. The downside is that if things don't have good contrast, they're typically going to be difficult to see. So there's an icon of one of the characters from Duolingo, B, and she has black hair and it's against a black background. And there's a little bit of color differentiation when the normal screen is visible. It's very difficult to see in the redshifted version. That's not so bad because that's not informative, but the little stars underneath her are supposed to represent levels that you've accomplished for a certain little mini game. And I really can't see those at all. So if I didn't know those were there, if I didn't sometimes not have that setting on, I might miss those. So that's an example of why contrast is really important because it's going to affect other versions or other ways that people might be looking at an app. Another really quick example, here's a screenshot of the Amazon website, which most people are, for better or for worse, probably familiar with. I just want to show examples of a few different types of vision adaptations that you can have. So this is from desktop. One thing you can do is color inversion. So the UI normally, right now at least, is teal with white on, or sorry, black on white text. Color inversion completely shifts it. And this is also something that you can do at the operating system level. This also looks a little bit weird if you can see it because you can't take screenshots of color inversion. So this is a photo I took of my screen. But it's turned all the teals pink, it's turned all the reds teal, all that original color information is lost. There's also things like forced dark mode, which is something I use all the time. I use a plugin called Dark Reader for Firefox, which either lets me trigger the dark mode of a website if there is one, but also if that version isn't really dark enough for me, or if there isn't a dark mode, it makes one. So this is another example of how the UI changes a little bit. I have a little bit of control over it, but I'm not seeing the same colors that you designed for. And here's my last example for that bucket of thinking is this is Windows high contrast. This is very commonly used on Windows. This is also a system-wide setting. And this is commonly used by people with vision issues. It strips out all of the background colors and all of the foreground colors and replaces them with the defaults for that theme. These are customizable by the user, but there's still only like 4 or 5 colors that are used. So everything on a screen is assigned to those colors. So again, all of that color information about kind of trying to get your attention with red and things like that is completely gone. It's color coding things based on what type of element they are instead of how they're styled. So just to summarize all that, don't assume that a user will see colors that you've chosen or that they'll see color at all. So do use color, but don't use that as the only way to convey information to folks. So next, let's talk about inclusive content strategy, which is a pretty broad topic, but I have a few specific examples. So one of the first things is to use headings, which this is something I've been telling people to do since 2001, but people still don't do it all the time. So I'm going to keep saying it. If you use headings on your web pages or in your mobile apps and your native apps, that gives screen reader users enough structure to understand how that page or screen is organized. It also is really helpful for sighted users to be able to easily skim that content, get a sense of what it's about. And it actually makes you think about how your content is organized and written. So you don't want to necessarily have headings that are snazzy calls to action. You want them to describe the content that they're heading for. So I have a kind of silly example, which is this is a chapter page from a book. That is chapter 3, fruits. That is the primary heading. That is the H1. And then the fruits are organized by type. So for the sections, I've got apples and bananas. And then I've got some subsections for apples. I've got Cosmic Crisps, Red Delicious, and Granny Smiths as examples of apples. So that's just a really simple example of that heading structure and how it basically creates an outline. Another thing you can do is write in plain, excuse me, write in plain language. Drink some more water. So what plain language means is the goal is really to create writing that is easy to read by the majority of people. That's going to include people who maybe didn't finish school. That is going to include people with learning disabilities. That's going to include people who maybe don't speak that language natively. And you can adjust this based on your audience. So if you work on something that is, for a particular audience, you can adjust that up or down. But in general, most people are creating work that's for the general public, and that grade 8 to 9 reading level is what you want to target. Again, this is gonna be helpful for things related to memory, attention, learning, language, and speech. Another thing that you can do, depending on the context, is define any unusual terms or acronyms up front, just so people know what words mean before they get deeper into the content. There are a couple really easy to use tools that can help you with this. One is called the Hemingway app. It's available as a browser app as well as a native app. I think there's a mobile and desktop version. And what it does is you can copy and paste content into it or just write into it directly. And it gives you suggestions for how to simplify your language. So I have an example up here that has a very long, very complicated sentence that I copied and pasted from a Wikipedia article. And it's given it a red highlight because it's a very hard to read sentence. Then I have a slightly less hard to read sentence. And then it's also color coding things like adverbs, which aren't inherently bad, but are often used kind of as padding, as well as passive voice, which is often used to kind of skirt around what you're actually talking about. So it gives you some suggestions for what should be simplified. And sometimes if there's a specific word or phrase that there's a very specific simpler version of, it recommends that to you. So as you adjust your text, it adjusts the grade level, gives you some more feedback about what you can tweak. If you are working on something that you can't paste into a browser, maybe for security reasons for your website or for your company, if that's the case, you're probably using Office, and there is a similar tool built into Word. It's called Editor. It shows up in the home kind of bar of buttons, and it brings up a sidebar that gives you grammar, conciseness, clarity, feedback. And it also gives you document stats, which includes things like the different grade levels. So this example I have, this document, it says is a grade level of 7.7. So actually a little bit lower than it needs to be. But again, this is just another easy to use tool to make sure that your writing is actually at the reading level that you want it to be. And this is going to be an experiment. I was having trouble with audio before. Oh no, I think it's going to work. I have a quick video. This is a YouTube short of a person demonstrating using a screen reader. And I want you to, if you're not familiar with screen readers, I want you to pay attention to how they describe how their computer is set up, and then listen to the speed at which they're actually listening to the content on the page. And I will turn on captions for that too, if I can.
Someone asked the question, what speed do you usually read at when you are using your computer? So what I'm going to do real quick is just play you a little excerpt from a website about screen readers using the speed that I generally read at. Now, just so you know, I'm not in my office today, so I'm using my portable computer that actually does not have a screen, because using a screen reader and being blind, the screen does me no good. So this little computer that I'm using right here in front of me is a Windows computer, and I actually plug my Braille display into it. This is actually called an L Braille, and as you'll see, there's no screen attached. But here's what it sounds like at the speed that I would normally listen at. There are two ways that this hardware can provide feedback to the user list of devices, where speech, where Braille is as a screen reader uses a text-to-speech TTS engine to translate on-screen information into speech with computer through earphones or speakers. The TTS may be a software application that comes bundled with the screen reader or the video.
Realize that was a little bit quiet. Hopefully you were able to hear it. But the captions were not able to pick up what the screen reader was saying. And that's pretty standard for people that are used to using screen readers. It's very similar to visually scanning a page. So these are just a few examples about why you want to be really thoughtful about the content that you're putting out there, and understanding that people are absorbing it in different ways and taking your words in different ways.
Someone
Replays it again for some reason. So make your content easy to read and understandable for your audience. If you haven't done research about who your audience is, find out what's kind of the, find out who they are, see if you can figure out what their learning level is, what their, are they native English speakers, etc. That's stuff that you can use to make your content clearer to your audience. So next we're going to talk about interactions and interaction order. I have a couple other short video examples. What this comes down to is mostly making your reading order and your interaction order match. So this is primarily for people that rely on keyboards to interact with websites or mobile apps. And this is going to require things like having an easy to see visible keyboard focus indicator, making sure that you're managing focus to things that interrupt the process, like modals, and also giving clear, intuitive labels for things. And you might be wondering why I have this here with interactions and not with the content section. And that's because this is really important for people who use things like voice control or Dragon Actually Speaking to actually give commands to perform interactions. So this is going to be, again, useful for folks that have memory or attention issues, people that have different types of sensory input issues, and people that have issues with fine motor skills. So I'm going to show you a quick video. This one doesn't have any sound. And I hope no one works at Twitch. I'm picking on Twitch a little bit. This is Twitch's help website. And this is just a video of me pressing the tab key, going through the page to see where focus goes. So typically we would want keyboard focus to move top to bottom, left to right. So see if you can follow the keyboard focus indicator in this case. So it kind of goes over to the right and then back to the left and then skips a thing and then goes down. And then it's going through a bunch of links, but you can't see, there's no focus indicator. You can see that they're links because of the little preview the browser gives you in the corner. And then the indicator shows up again when you're in the footer. So this is an example of, I think most things on this page actually got focused, that should get focused, but they did not have a visual indicator. So if a person is relying on the keyboard or something that behaves like a keyboard to interact, this is going to make it very difficult to know where they are or what they're able to do. Another quick video, this is a person using voice control on iOS. This is actually an Apple support video, but it's a really nice, concise explanation of how voice control works.
If you use voice control, here's how to take a selfie. With voice control turned on in your accessibility settings, say Open Camera. If you'd like to see the names of the buttons on the screen, you can say Show Names at any time. Say Tap Camera Chooser to switch to your front camera. Then say Tap Take Picture.
Tap Take Picture.
Say cheese.
So this is a case where the commands that the person is reading out are based on the way that the labels of the elements are implemented. So that's a native app example, but it works exactly the same way on the web, where you want to make sure that your labels are intuitive and clear, and that people can, ideally guess what they are and use them correctly, or if not, be able to call them up and see what they are based on the way that they've been programmed.
If you use
why it replays. So think about your interactions. Think about, are they labeled intuitively? Are they in a logical order? Does that order match the reading order? Are people going to understand where they are as they're navigating through the page? And are they not going to be surprised by where they end up? So for these last two, a little bit shorter. So we should be good on time. This one is provide media alternatives. These you're probably pretty familiar with. I'm not going to go into these in a lot of detail. You want to provide captions. For videos, you want to provide open captions ideally, which means that they are generated by whatever the program is. They're not burned into the video. The problem with that style is that people can't control what those captions look like. So you may have noticed if you've dug around in your operating system settings or in the settings even in Zoom, if you're using the captions in Zoom, you have some control over the font size, the colors, things like that. Those are things that you want people to be able to control themselves. The other thing you want to do is provide transcripts for videos and audio. So any sort of video you have on your site, any podcasts, things like that. And then you want to provide appropriate alt text for images that are informative, and that context is, or that information is based on that context. So this is again for folks with any sort of attention or memory issues, as well as for folks that maybe aren't looking at the screen, or who might be using a combination of a screen reader and also looking at the screen. So I have a couple of examples. You always want to include a description for informative or functional images. And the way I would describe that would be an informative image, something like a chart or a graph. You're supposed to look at it and understand some sort of information. You need some sort of text equivalent for that information. A functional image would be something like using an icon as a button, maybe a search, a magnifying glass icon for a search field, things like that. Both of those cases, you're going to make sure you include some sort of text for that icon or for that image. But it's going to depend on how it's being used. So we don't have time now to go into charts and diagrams and graphs, but I do want to use a couple examples with a photo, as well as a picture of some icons. So I've got a photo of a person wearing a brown sweater, and they've got blonde hair, and they have their arms folded, and they're kind of smiling. And the question is, like, how do you describe this image based on the context? So one context might be that it's a product photo, in which case you're going to focus on the piece of clothing. In this case, we'll say that the sweater is the product that is being sold. So the description should really be about the product. It doesn't necessarily need to describe the model who's wearing it. So in this case, you might want to have a description like, coffee colored, relaxed fit crew neck sweater so that people have an idea of what the product looks like. If this is just kind of an image that's in like a listicle or in a header image of a banner or a header image of a post or something, this is probably a decorative image. You probably don't need to describe it. However, there might be a situation where it's really important to identify the person in the photo as well as maybe describe what they look like. So if this was for a book review, for example, if this is a picture of the author, we'd want to call that out. We want to say author Susan Smith, and then we could say a white woman with shoulder length blonde hair. This is an example of the type of information you might want to include in that scenario. For icons, it's very similar. You probably see icons used a lot as like links to go to social media sites or as buttons, like I mentioned earlier. So if that's the case, I've got Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, rest in peace, Twitter. So in that case, your Facebook icon is going to be your link content to Facebook. You just want that content to be Facebook. You don't want it to be Facebook icon. You don't want it to be black circle with white Facebook F. You want it to just say Facebook because it's functioning as a link that takes you to Facebook. However, if this is part of a design portfolio, for example, where a person has designed some icons, you're going to want to describe the icon in that case. So in that case, we could use something like white on black Facebook logo as an example. So it really depends on what the context is as to what the description should be for these types of images. So you want to make sure that people can access media in the formats that work for them, which might be text, it might be captions, it might be audio. There's many different options. And then making sure that those options make sense in context so that you're not using a description that doesn't make sense for what you're trying to convey. And the last one, actually the shortest one, give users control. This is very broad and very contextual. So there's a bunch of very specific WCAG success criteria about this. But in general, the things you want to be thinking about are allowing users to pause, stop, or hide video, animations, and audio, things that autoplay. Ideally don't autoplay, but if you do, allow people to pause or stop anything that's autoplaying. You also want to support reduced motion preferences, which are built into devices at the operating system level. Those basically allow you to, either with CSS or in code in native apps, to say, this animation is not necessary, it's just decorative, so don't do it if a person has this setting turned on. I have it turned on all my devices all the time. So I don't see animated GIFs automatically. I don't see animated like icons in Slack, things like that. I just don't see that stuff because it gives me a migraine. You also want to avoid flashing. There's certain levels of flashing that can induce seizures, but just don't have flashing on your website. Don't have flashing graphics. And also avoid CAPTCHAs. There's actually a new WCAG success criteria that is basically about avoiding CAPTCHAs, which is really exciting. The CAPTCHAs are annoying for people with brain fog, which I do, which I have. So anything related to memory, attention, sensory inputs, assuming that a person can see a graphic of a certain type, assuming that a person can click on a certain thing, can do math problems, just don't do it. Avoid them at all costs. Because those are things that are very, very easy to implement. And they're also very, very difficult for some people to use. So just to show you reduced motion, this is what reduced motion, where it lives in on Mac OS. It's in the display settings under accessibility, and it's just a little toggle switch. So that's what I have turned on. So again, I don't get animations kind of at the operating system level, and I also don't see them if they're implemented that way on the web as well. So the general takeaway from this is to be kind. I know that sometimes you don't have the choice about what exactly you're putting on a web page. A business decision might have been made, but whenever possible, be kind to users and think about, things, at least avoiding things that might cause explicit harm. Okay, so I've got some resources and next steps for you. The biggest thing I want you to take away from this, if you forget everything else I've said, is to start with usability and inclusivity and not compliance when you're thinking about accessibility. It's very, very tempting and very easy, and most people's entry point to accessibility work is through things like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They capture part of the picture. They're extremely helpful tools, but that's not the end all be all of accessibility. So it's really important to really start with the expectation of the goal is to make things that people can use and as many people as possible. And if you're going to do it from a compliance standpoint, it's not going to be as fun for you, and it's going to be probably not as fun for your users either. Another thing I hear a lot when people are talking about how to talk about accessibility at work, they're like, well, accessibility and disability aren't part of our DEI or DEIB efforts, and they should be. So if you work in DEI, get on that. But if you work at a company that has a DEI team, they should already be thinking about accessibility and disability as part of diversity and inclusion. So the main ways that you can, sort of starting tomorrow, add accessibility to your UX practice are through educating yourself, annotations, and communication with the developers that you work with, and through user research. A few, what I think at least are UX-friendly resources to get started if you're just beginning your accessibility journey, or not, if you're further along it too. There's a really great website called a11yproject.org. A11y is often used to abbreviate the word accessibility. It's complicated. It's a terrible word to spell. So that's a really great website. There's a lot of resources about doing all sorts of different types of accessibility work, a lot of design resources in particular. There's also 2 YouTube channels I highly recommend. One is Accessibility Talks and one is Inclusive Design 24. Accessibility Talks is a monthly stream. A different accessibility expert talks about a thing. And Inclusive Design 24 is an annual 24-hour conference is not the right word. People give accessibility talks 24 hours over the course of a day. And then all of those things are archived on YouTube. So all of those are available. And there's a lot of really good really smart people that are doing especially inclusivity work in our space, and those 2 channels are a great way to see people that are in the accessibility field, to see who to follow, whose work you want to catch up on, who you want to connect with on LinkedIn, that kind of thing. If you are using Figma or something like Figma, if you're using Sketch, or I always forget what Adobe's version of that is called, there are also tools available. So I'm going to focus on Figma since that's what most people are using. But one option is to use Stark for Figma, which started out as just doing contrast and now does a bunch of other accessibility testing and also annotations. So that, or the Indeed.com Accessibility Annotation Kit, or Intopia's Accessibility Annotation Kit, there's a bunch of them out there now. These are just the Indeed.com one is kind of, I think, the oldest, and there's just a whole bunch of them that people have kind of made for their own companies and then released. But the main point of this is that all of these tools let you add annotations to your designs to convey accessibility information. So if you are talking with your developer, well, first of all, if you're not talking to your developer, you should be. And one of the ways you can do that is through annotations. Ideally, you're actually talking to them, but this is a way that you can provide some information about interactions, alt text, labeling, things like that, without the developer having to guess what they should be based on the visual design. I could give a whole talk just on this topic, but some kind of highlights, things to think about if you're doing research with disabled users. You want to have participants use their own devices and setups. Taking them into a lab is not going to be an accurate experience. You want them to be using the things that they normally use and the way that they normally use them. You want to talk to them as early as possible in the software development lifecycle or the product development lifecycle. And you can do your own recruiting. It usually takes a lot of work, but you can absolutely do your own recruiting for this sort of thing. You can reach out to local disability support organizations or centers for independent living, or there are companies that specialize in that specialize in helping you reach a community of disabled users to do usability testing with. And then you also want to compensate them in the way that works for them. Laws are really weird about if you're on disability, people can't have a lot of cash, so people might prefer gift cards. There's lots of different ways that you might compensate people, but make sure you do compensate them. Another thing, Larry will be happy about this. I'm giving a workshop in January. So if you enjoyed this and you want 6 more hours of it, you could join us for that. It's at svcseattle.com/accessibility. You can see some more information about that there. We're going to go more into depth. So we are going to talk more about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, talk about design solutions, talk about advocacy, so sort of like the frameworks and the things you got to know, and then ways to integrate them into your workflow. And that's going to be January 17th and 24th, which are both Wednesdays, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific time. And Larry also mentioned, yes, I'm writing a book. Oh boy. This is primarily aimed at accessibility specialists or people that want to get into the field as specialists, but it is basically about the types of things you need to do to get accessibility work moving at scale or at all sometimes in your organization. There's a lot of stuff about coalition building and kind of figuring out your strategies, and avoiding burnout is a big part of it. My plan is to get it out this spring, fingers crossed. And I'm kind of crowdfunding it a little bit. This was a little bit of an experiment. So I have a Ko-fi page set up, which is kofi.com/A11Y Devon, where you can learn more about that and pre-order it basically if you're interested in seeing that when it comes out. So I don't know how much time we have left because we started a little bit late and I'm on full screen. So I don't know how much time we have left for actual
We have
questions.
9 minutes.
Oh, okay, that's not too bad.
And we have 2 questions.
Oh, perfect.
Here's an easy one from Natasha. What would be an alternative to CAPTCHAs?
To CAPTCHAs? So it's really a security problem that your security team should solve. I don't know what the specifics are because I'm not a security person, but CAPTCHAs are basically are kind of the easy way out as far as like putting that on the user to be secure. There are things that can be done in systems that don't require the user to actually prove that they're a human. Even aside from the kind of like issues with intellectual disabilities and being able to perceive the CAPTCHA. Sometimes CAPTCHA systems think that assistive technology users, people that use things like screen readers, are robots, and so they just don't work. So if you are relying on CAPTCHAs, talk to your IT people. There are other options.
Great, thank you. This next question will take about an hour and a half to answer, so good luck. And this comes from Natasha again, as well as Rebecca, who I'll just read Rebecca. She said talking about that accessibility is seen as competition for dev time. And it is, quote, not a moneymaker like feature work. Any counsel on how we can make a case?
So this was a topic. There's an annual conference in Toronto, an accessibility conference, and that was a topic that came up a lot. And my general feeling and the feelings of a lot of people that work in this space is that it's not worth anyone's time hitting their head against a wall when that is the pushback. Because basically what people are saying when they're saying that it's a competition for dev time or there's not there's not ROI. They're saying that we don't want disabled users or customers, just flat out. Just saying like we don't. Yeah, no, it's fine, whatever. You're saying that you don't care, and okay, that's a stance that people are going to take, and those people usually cannot be convinced. They will follow along if there is more of a groundswell of support for it, and it happens anyway. But there are always people that are not going to be who just won't listen. And unfortunately, a lot of those people are in high leadership positions. So if you're in that sort of situation, I would say do what you can, like do what you can within your role, within your team. But don't expect any sort of big sea change to happen unless you have that support. And unfortunately, what usually happens is then that company will get sued, and then everyone will be like, "Well, see, it's such a drain on our resources." That the way that if your organization is functioning that way, there's not really a good way to convince those people. Which I realize is not a really great answer, or not like a fun or inspiring answer. And I used to be much more like, you can just convince them. There's all this business case stuff. And in general, if people don't care, they're not going to care. So don't talk to those people. Don't work with them if you can help it. Don't be friends with them.
There you go. You heard it here. Brennan wants to know about alternatives or workarounds with accordion menus.
Oh God. Okay. I need more information. What type of workarounds?
Brennan,
This could
why
be an
don't
hour
you-
and a half answer.
Why don't you unmute and give us the fast summary?
Sure. So we have a lot of pages that have a bunch of, excuse me, information on them. Like, let's say we have one page. I work for the city of Vancouver, by the way. So we have one page where people can book venues for their wedding at different parks. So we'll have a list of like 20 different venues in an accordion menu, and then people can open each different venue to read more information about it. And we rely on accordion menus on quite a few of our pages to make them shorter. And we do offer, there is like a control on the side, so people have control to minimize or expand that text. But I'm just wondering if those are ideal, or if we should be looking for some alternative to that.
It really depends on the context. I would say if you are using accordions, and that sounds like someone made a design decision, and they're probably not going to budge. But ideally, for that sort of scenario, I think you just wouldn't use them. But if you are using them, yes, there are absolutely like technically accessible patterns for accordions. If you aren't already looking at the ARIA spec and the examples in the ARIA patterns, I would look there. Yeah, they're not ideal, but if they're made to be keyword accessible, if they have a visible focus indicator, if the headings for them are good, like if it's easy to kind of browse them and open and close them, it's not the worst thing in the world. But yeah, if you're literally just doing it to make the page shorter, pages don't cost money by length, so there's really no reason to do that. An alternative could potentially be having your longer page and then maybe making like a table of contents or like local navigation so people can jump between them. There's lots of different ways to do that, but yeah, I think it's a really good example of how like, yes, you can absolutely make them accessible so people can use them, but is it a good design choice? I don't know. That would be a great thing to do usability testing on with users, just to see what their feedback is.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Jana wants to know, does the visual designer make the call on how the dark mode is set up, or is that just sort of, or high contrast mode, or is that kind of left to the operating system to kind of apply?
So dark mode is absolutely up to your control, like dark mode in the browser, or if you're doing native apps, that's absolutely within your control. There are certain things that are kind of, at least for native apps, there's certain things that are out of your control, but for the web, you can do literally whatever you want. It's just a different style sheet. So, and a lot of websites have them. So if you have your system settings set to dark mode by default, that communicates to your browser. And so if a website does have a dark mode, I see it, for example, because I have everything set to dark mode all the time. But if a website doesn't have one, or it's not really good enough for what I need, that's when I will either manually turn on that browser plugin I mentioned, or people might use other tools to adjust things. So you can absolutely design your dark mode and light mode. The thing that is completely out of your control is something like that Windows high contrast mode, because that is operating system level. Like I said, it has just like a handful of colors. It's really designed to be as absolutely minimal as possible. And so that is really up to the user as to which version of that theme they're using. I just showed you one example, but there's a few different defaults, so you can also make your own. But that's really completely handing your color choices off to the user, because they need that amount of control to be able to look at your page. So I hope that helps. And there's a lot of different tools and settings and things, and they work in different parts of the operating system and the browser, and people are going to be using them differently. But at a very high level, that is how those kind of differ.
But if you have questions like these and want to go deep, I mean, that's the reason for the workshop in January, because there's just only so much we can cram into an hour here, especially when I steal the first 5 or 10 minutes. So thank you. I think this was a success.
Thank you.
And technical glitch aside, man,
I even have a slide that says that.
and we agree.
Yeah.
So
yeah, thanks folks that were able to attend. If you do want to pick my brain more or connect on the internet, you can find my website at devonpersing.com. It's pretty sparse, but there's some information about me and links to some things I've written or videos I've made, things that you might find useful. You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find me on Ko-fi for the book project. And you can also get there from my website if you don't remember the URL or it's a pain to type. Yeah, I used to be on Twitter, and I'm not really on social media anymore. So, you know, what are you gonna do?
we
But
love you even more.
you can send me an email via my website if you want to. I also do mentoring. There's information about that on my website too. If this is a space you want to get into, or you're in it and you want some guidance, that is a thing I provide too. So yeah.
Well, Devon, thank you so much. And as we said at the beginning, we're going to get the deck and link to the recording of this out to everybody. So hopefully those, I saw a couple comments where someone said, could you go back and show me that slide again? You'll get the slide tomorrow. So thanks everyone. And again, Devon, thank you so much. Let's go get a maple bar.
Yes.
Come on.
Just
yeah. Maybe not tonight.
Maybe not now. Maybe when it's slightly warmer outside.
Okay. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we will see you again.
Great. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.